For 40 years, the United States has been governed by a specific kind of person, drawn almost without exception from one of three universities, who have made roughly the same decisions in every administration. Those decisions broke the country. The system that put them in office is older than any of us. It was designed in 1922 by one man at Harvard, in a letter no one outside the school would read for 60 years. It is still running this spring. The most credentialed generation in American history is the one that's breaking the country. And in this episode, I'm going to show you why. It is 6:30 in the morning, and the kid is already at the desk. There is a math test in 7 hours. The kid has not failed a math test in 3 years, and they will not fail this one. At dinner tonight, their parents will ask about the grade. The only acceptable answer is the highest one. In 2002, a Columbia psychologist named Sunia Luther walked into the wealthiest suburbs in America to ask the parents how their daughters were doing. The parents told her their daughters were fine. Then Luther interviewed the daughters. 22% of the girls in those suburbs were carrying clinical depressive symptoms. The national rate at the time was 7. The figure for the boys was not far behind. The grades the kids were getting kept arriving on schedule, and the depression kept arriving with them. And nobody who could have done something was reading both lines of the ledger at once. Luther described the mechanism in one sentence. When a kid's sense of self-worth gets tied to how much they accomplish, they live in a state of constant fear that the achieving might stop. The kid at the desk has been living that sentence since they were 6 years old. Luther had only studied one group of kids, in one place, over a short period. A psychologist named Thomas Curran spent the next 15 years checking whether the same thing was happening to a much wider group of kids. Curran looked at the answers of 41,000 college students from across 28 years. Over those years, kids' belief that they had to be perfect for other people to love them rose 32%. 3 years later, Curran ran a second study, focused this time on the parents. Kids said the pressure they were getting at home had risen 40% in 3 decades. Those numbers describe the kids the Ivy League recruits from. They describe the generation the kid at the desk belongs to. They describe a country that has spent 3 decades telling its most ambitious children that they are not enough. There is something the depression numbers are pointing at that nobody quite says out loud. The pressure does more than hurt the kids who grow up under it. It breaks most of them. 1 in 5 of the girls who grow up in this kind of household is clinically depressed by senior year. By college, the kids who came out of this pipeline are 2.5 times more likely than other Americans to be drinking or using their way through it. Most of them never reach the part of America that runs the country. They end up somewhere quieter, hating themselves, with suicide thoughts no one in their family ever names. The ones who do make it are a minority of a minority. About half of what makes a person capable of dissociation under pressure is heritable. Robert Hare, who designed the standard test for psychopathic traits, found that the rate of those traits in senior corporate management is 3 to 4 times the rate in the general population. The system has not been building this personality from scratch. It has been finding kids who are already partly built for it. The kids who weren't built that way didn't make it. The country has spent 90 years calling the survivors the best of us. None of this tells us where the pattern came from. To find that, we have to leave the suburbs. We have to go back almost 100 years, to a building in Massachusetts and a letter written by a man whose name has been mostly forgotten. In 1922, the president of Harvard was a man named A. Lawrence Lowell. Lowell had been running the university for 13 years, and he had a problem. Lowell's problem was that Harvard's admissions process had been working too well. The university tested applicants on their math, their Latin, their composition. The smartest applicants got in. By the early 1920s, the smartest applicants in the country were arriving in Cambridge in unprecedented numbers. They were also, in a much greater proportion than Lowell wanted, Jewish. Lowell wrote a letter to the admissions committee. The letter is in his own handwriting, and it is still in the Harvard archive. In it, Lowell wrote that admitting Jews would ruin the college. In the same letter, Lowell explained what he meant by ruin. He compared the situation to a summer hotel. The hotel that is ruined by admitting Jews, he wrote, meets its fate not because the Jews it admits are of bad character, but because they drive away the Gentiles, and then after the Gentiles have left, the Jews leave also. The Jewish students Lowell was watching arrive were getting top marks and behaving well. That was the problem. They were going to outcompete the kind of student Harvard had been built around, which was a wealthy white Protestant. Lowell asked the admissions committee to formalize a Jewish quota, and they refused to put it in writing. So he solved the problem a different way. He introduced a new word into American admissions. The word was character. Character could not be measured by a test. Character could not be challenged in a court of law. Character was, in the words of the Berkeley sociologist Jerome Karabel, shorthand for an entire ethos and way of being. It was intangible, and it could only be judged by people who already had it. Within 11 years, Jewish enrollment at Harvard had dropped from 21% of the freshman class to 15%. The drop had been the work of a single word. The word is still in use today. In 2026, the Harvard application has a section called Personal. The section asks the kid who they are. The reading of the section is done by an admissions officer in a small office in Cambridge, who has roughly 30 seconds to assign the kid a number between 1 and 4. The number is called the personal rating, and it is what Lowell's word has become. A kid who scores a 1 will probably get in. A kid who scores a 3 or 4 will not. The number is not posted, and it cannot be appealed. In 2014, a group of Asian American students sued Harvard. They had discovered that their personal ratings had been, on average, lower than the personal ratings of every other group. Their test scores and grades had been higher. The thing keeping them out of Harvard, according to the lawsuit, was the personal rating. The Supreme Court ruled against Harvard in 2023. The ruling addressed the use of race in admissions, but it did not address the personal rating. The personal rating is still in the admissions file, and it is still being assigned every spring. The number gets you into Harvard. What Harvard does to you after that is the next part of the story. It is the first Friday of orientation. Somewhere in a freshman dormitory, our new arrival is unpacking. The unpacking is being done in alphabetical order, from a list made 3 weeks ago which is mostly already complete. The roommate has not arrived. When the unpacking is finished, our new arrival walks down the hallway to find the vending machine. On the door across the hall, there is a small framed certificate. The certificate is from a national academic competition. The certificate is for first place. Our new arrival has the same certificate at home, from the same competition, also for first place. By Sunday, our freshman has met 14 of the other 31 kids on the floor. The roommate has the same grade point average our freshman does. The kid in the room across the hall has a slightly higher one. The kid downstairs performed at Carnegie Hall when they were 13. Each of these kids was, in their own town, the one. None of them are the one anymore. 3 weeks into the semester, the first midterm comes back. The grade is a B. Our hero has never, in 15 years of being praised, received a B. They have received minuses on A grades and felt physically ill for the rest of the day. The B feels like a diagnosis. From here, the story can go in 2 directions. Some kids look at the B, look at the kids around them, and have the most useful breakdown of their lives. They go home, they become florists, or programmers or fathers, and they live. The kid who unpacked in alphabetical order is going to take the other direction. They will spend the next 4 years finding a way to be the kid who got every A again against the kids who were trained to do exactly the same. The race is not going to stop. By the end of freshman year, our hero has done what they were trained to do. They have joined 2 clubs, 1 publication, and an undergraduate research group. They have figured out which professors will write the best recommendation letters in 3 years, and they have begun stopping by those professors' office hours every Wednesday at 4. What our hero discovers, somewhere in sophomore year, is that the academic performance was only the cover charge. The real game is somewhere else. The real game runs inside a small number of rooms on this campus. The rooms are not on any map. At Yale, the most important of these rooms is called Skull and Bones. It is in a windowless brick building on the corner of High Street. 15 seniors are tapped to join each year. About 800 members are alive at any given moment. At Harvard, the equivalent room is called the Porcelain. At Princeton, it is the Ivy Club. The doors are different. The function is the same. In the 2004 American presidential election, the 2 major party nominees came out of the same tomb. They had been tapped 2 years apart at Yale. They had sworn the same oaths in the same windowless brick building. On the night of one of the presidential debates, when the moderator asked what it meant that they had been members of the same secret society, John Kerry said the only thing he was permitted to say. Not much, because it's a secret. Senior Spring. The kid is sitting at a table in a restaurant that costs more per person than most American families spend on groceries in a week. The table is celebrating the kid's job offer. Their parents are crying. The kid is calculating what their first-year savings rate will need to be to buy a 1-bedroom in Tribeca by year 3. What is happening at this table is sometimes called depression, or anxiety, or loneliness. The accurate term is something more concerning. What is being built at this table and at thousands of others like it across the country tonight checks all the boxes for a high-functioning sociopath. The clinical literature would not commit to the diagnosis. On a strict reading, our protagonist does not meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. They would pass any psychiatric screening put in front of them. They will also, 15 years from tonight, find themselves in a room where a decision is being made about whether to save the people who lost their homes in a financial crisis or the people who caused it. They will choose the second group. They will feel nothing when they do. Remember what the data already told us. The kids who grew up in this kind of pressure didn't all get their brains rewired by it. Most of them broke. The kid still sitting at this table is not someone the system built. The kid is someone the system found. 15 years of being loved only when winning produces a brain that processes other people as obstacles, instruments, or rivals. Our hero is not pretending to be okay. They genuinely cannot feel what the people across from them are feeling, including the people who are crying tonight at this table. This is the personality the system was selecting for the entire time. It is the personality the country has spent 93 years training. Our newly graduate takes the consulting job. The first 3 years are 80 hours a week. Next comes a bigger firm, then a hedge fund, then a public policy think tank. Somewhere along the way, an MBA arrives that costs more than most American families earn in a decade. By 35, the person who once unpacked their suitcase in alphabetical order is advising the White House on financial policy. By 45, they are running the part of the Treasury Department that decides which banks get to exist. In September 2008, an investment bank that has existed for 158 years collapses on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, the United States government has to decide which of the remaining banks will be saved with public money and which will not. The decisions are being made by a small group of men in a small number of rooms. All of them came out of the same universities. Several of them came out of the same secret societies. One of them is a man named Larry Summers. Summers went to MIT, then to Harvard for his PhD, then served as Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary, then president of Harvard, then Barack Obama's chief economic advisor. In 2000, while running the Treasury under Clinton, He told the American Economic Association the cleanest version of the doctrine he had built his career on. A healthy financial system cannot be built on the expectation of bailouts. In 2009, the same man authored the largest bailout in human history. He did not seem to see the contradiction. People who come out of this system rarely do. The Treasury Secretary executing the bailout was named Tim Geithner. Wall Street CEOs, interviewed by the journalist Ron Suskind, referred to Geithner in their own boardrooms as our man in Washington. The Inspector General assigned to oversee the bailout was named Neil Barofsky. Barofsky wrote down what he watched. Geithner, he wrote, was a captured government official who put the interest of Wall Street and a handful of banks over that of Main Street and the broader economy. What happened in 2008 was the system working as designed. The men in the room had been trained from the age of 6 to make exactly the decisions they made. I know how this is going to sound. Obama is one of the popular ones. He is the most appreciated American political figure of the last 50 years. There are good reasons for that. He has a warm voice. His speeches often felt, while you were listening to them, like solid hope. He is the first African American president of the United States. He speaks so coherently, you forget you are watching a politician. He is stoic, he has a sense of humor that lands, and he brings people together with an effortlessness no other politician of his generation can match. All of those traits are real. They are also the traits the system selects for. The personality that can give the speech in Denver in August, and then appoint Larry Summers in January without internal friction, is the same personality that can speak coherently to a divided country and bring it together. The warmth and the dissociation run on the same architecture. Obama campaigned in 2008 on a promise to break exactly the kind of arrangement that Summers and Geithner represented. He won by the largest margin any Democrat had managed in decades. In January 2009, he appointed, to every major economic position in his administration, people from the exact world the campaign had named as the problem. The pattern continued through both terms. The candidate who had campaigned against Bush's foreign wars launched drone strikes in 7 countries. The candidate who had campaigned against the surveillance state left it larger than he found it. The candidate who had promised to close Guantanamo within a year of taking office left office 8 years later, with Guantanamo still open. None of this was incompetence. Obama did not stumble into the appointments or the wars or the surveillance expansions. He chose them with the same composure that made the speeches feel like hope. The composure was real. The hope was real. The internal architecture that produced both was the architecture the system had been training in him since childhood. He left office in January 2017 with an approval rating around 60%. He has spent the years since giving paid speeches to Wall Street firms for $400,000 an hour. The part of him that would have felt the contradictions was, by the time he was old enough to vote, no longer there. People who come out of this system rarely have it anymore. The current Vice President of the United States is a man named James David Vance, who goes by JD. Vance was born in Middletown, Ohio in 1984. His family was poor. He served in the United States Marines, attended Ohio State University on the GI Bill, and finished his education at Yale Law School. In 2016, he published a memoir about growing up in Appalachia that became a New York Times bestseller. The book was praised across the political spectrum for honest writing about a community most American writers did not know how to describe. In 2016, the same year the memoir was published, Vance had a position on Donald Trump. In a published op-ed for The Atlantic, he called Trump cultural heroin, a needle in America's collective vein. In a private text message to a former Yale Law classmate, later disclosed publicly, he wrote that he was a never Trump guy. In another message that year, he wrote that Trump was either a cynical asshole like Nixon or America's Hitler. 6 years later, in 2022, Vance ran for the United States Senate seat in Ohio with the endorsement of Donald Trump. He won. 2 years after that, in 2024, Trump selected him as his running mate. He won that too. He is now the second most powerful person in the federal government, serving the man he had compared to Hitler in writing 8 years earlier. Vance has never publicly reconciled the two positions. He has not been asked on any major television program to account for what changed in him between 2016 and 2024. The country has, in 8 years, watched him become exactly the kind of man he once warned us about. He has shown no public sign of noticing. He had, by the time he reached Yale Law School, the same dissociation trained into him that Summers and Geithner and Obama had trained into them. Above the presidents we elect, there is a layer of people who make the decisions the presidents announce. Most Americans cannot name them. They do not appear on ballots. They cycle through positions of immense power across decades, across administrations, across parties. They all came out of the Ivy League. They knew each other, sat on each other's boards, and hired each other's protégés. They moved between Wall Street, the Treasury, the White House, and academia, without ever having to explain how their views from one position had changed by the time they reached the next. Here are three. Robert Rubin went to Harvard, then Yale Law. He spent 26 years at Goldman Sachs, becoming co-chairman in 1990. In 1995, Bill Clinton appointed him Treasury Secretary. Rubin spent the next 4 years dismantling the regulatory architecture that had kept Wall Street and consumer banking separate since 1933. After he left the Treasury, he joined Citigroup, the bank that was structured specifically to exploit the deregulation Rubin had just authored. 9 years later, Citigroup was one of the banks that nearly collapsed because of that deregulation. Henry Paulson went to Dartmouth, then Harvard Business School. He joined Goldman in 1974, became chief executive in 1999, and left to run the United States Treasury for George W. Bush in 2006. 2 years later, in October 2008, Paulson sat in a small conference room at the New York Federal Reserve and decided which of his former colleagues' firms would survive the financial crisis and which would not. Of the major Wall Street banks, Goldman Sachs survived. Lehman Brothers, Goldman's primary competitor, did not. Paulson was personally responsible for the initial $700 billion bailout. Henry Kissinger's career stretched across 6 decades. He was born in Germany in 1923, came to the United States as a child, attended Harvard, and never really left government. He was a fixture in the foreign policy advisory networks of every American administration from Kennedy to Trump. In 1969, he directed the secret bombing of Cambodia, an operation that killed somewhere between 50,000 and 150,000 civilians. In 1973, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He directed the destabilization of Allende's Chile that same year. He died in 2023 at the age of 100, having never apologized for any of it, and was eulogized in the most prominent newspapers in the country as a statesman. This is the pattern. The men who run the country were selected at 17 or 18 by a small number of admissions committees in a small number of universities in the Northeast. The committees were looking for a specific personality. The personality is what made these men capable of getting into the rooms. The personality is also what made them capable, once in the rooms, of making decisions they could not feel. On the outside, they look like the most capable, the most empathetic, the most resilient people in America. That is the curation. The actions tell the other story. The decisions they make when they sit in a room with the country's money, or its wars, or its vulnerable people, contradict everything they say they stand for. The system was always selecting for one trait. The trait is the ability to say one thing, do the opposite, and never feel the contradiction. That ability is why these men are in the rooms. That ability is why the country looks the way it looks. You probably think, by this point, that the system I've been describing must belong to another time. After all, Lowell wrote his letter more than 100 years ago, and the country since then has been through more upheaval than anyone in 1922 could have imagined. And yet the personality the system is still selecting for hasn't changed at all. It's actually even more powerful now. The personal rating is still being assigned every spring the way it has been since 1923. The system has been producing the same kind of person on schedule for 93 springs in a row. And those people today run more of the country than they ever have. This system can't run on its own, but actually, it has never needed our help. What it has needed for 93 years is for the whole operation to stay inside a small, exclusive club. Most of us were never invited. You and I have never been at one of the dinner parties where the recommendations get traded. We've never sat through the committee meeting where the personal rating gets assigned to a 17-year-old in 20 seconds. We weren't kept out by accident. We were kept out by design. There is a kid somewhere in the country tonight who is 12 years old. They have been told in 100 small ways that love is something they will earn by being the best. They have been told it long enough that they believe it. They have already started building the file. They do not know what the file is for. The file is the kid's admission to the American aristocracy. You probably think you get to choose who runs the country when you vote. That's exactly what democracy looks like on paper. The actual vote, though, happened years earlier, when those people were 17, in a small room in Cambridge. And you weren't there. You weren't in that room. You weren't given the personality. That means you still have something the people who get to that room are trained to lose: the ability to feel a contradiction when it lands in front of you. There is a kid in your life right now, a son, a niece, a neighbor's 12-year-old. Maybe you were that kid once. They are being told, in 100 small ways, that love is something they earn by winning. The room in Cambridge cannot reach them unless someone closer to them does it first. And you are closer to them than the room is. If this said something you needed to hear, subscribe. There is more coming, and it goes deeper than this. If someone in your life is raising a kid who has already started building the file, send this to them. That kind of reach does more for this channel than any algorithm will. Comments are open. I read everyone, especially the ones that disagree with me. There is a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description if you want to help keep this thing running. No paywall, no tears, just a way to say, keep going. I plan to. Thank you for watching.